You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and I welcome you all to the second to last edition of NFL Power Rankings for the 2024 NFL season. We got one final weekend of football games left to go, but before we do that, before we make our predictions for that final weekend, as we always do every Tuesday morning, we got to re-rank the teams from 32 to number 1 through the tier list. A lot happened this week, plenty to discuss. As I always say, fire away in that comment section down below. I would love to hear from you all. What do you like about this week's rankings? What do you dislike? What am I getting wrong? All that. If I'm getting anything right? Or fire away and let me hear your rankings. Even if it's not all 32, maybe your top 5, your top 10, would love to hear. But you're looking at last week's rankings right now. We're going to reset the board, starting from the bottom, working our way up to the top, number 1 overall pick category. As we do first, at number 32, at the very bottom, back again, familiar face, the New England Patriots, ranking as the 32nd team in the NFL. The Browns right above them at 31, Giants at 30, Titans at 29, Bears finding their way into this group at number 28, and the Jacksonville Jaguars sitting in pretty at the top at number 27. So the Patriots now at 3-13 in pole position now for the first overall pick in this year's draft. All they have to do is lose next week, and that pick is theirs. No matter what else happens through the remainder of the 15 games on the schedule, they lose. It is their number 1 overall selection. Losing 40-7 in a game where, aside from the Drake May touchdown throw, there was nothing to be happy about. This is a team that from top to bottom is pretty much awful. You might have 3, maybe 4 guys on this roster right now currently that would be starting on another football team, and that's insane considering there are 22 positions fielded at any given moment on the football field. So this team is as bad as they come, and it's incredible to me that there is a team even worse than Cleveland sitting at 31, but there is the Browns. I feel like for the last few weeks, I haven't even really had to talk too much about their games because there really has not been a lot to say. I mean, they have been not good for a while now, and this season has been just an unmitigated disaster. But the big thing for me, takeaway this past weekend, that had nothing to do with what happened on the football field, was the renegotiation and ultimately adding the void years to Deshaun Watson's contract to keep him playing for the football team for the foreseeable future. I can't believe, and I guess, and I don't agree with it, but I guess I understand not wanting to just cut Watson loose and give him the rest of that money because they owe him every single penny. But I cannot believe that there is a realistic possibility now that Deshaun Watson is going to be the starting quarterback again for Cleveland. Browns fans, I am so sorry that this is what you are dealing with. I only can wish you the best moving forward because I cannot believe that that is going to be a real possibility for next year now with the way that they renegotiated this deal. The Giants above them at number 30 here, finding a massive way to win and kicking themselves right out of that number 1 pick spot. Drew Lock, 309 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown on top of it. And it took a terrible Colts defense to allow it to happen, but this is a team that had not scored more than 22 points this season, doubling that total and some change, hitting that 45 mark with their win over the Colts here. And the only thing I'm really curious about right now is just for you Giants fans out there, are you happy about this win, or are you upset that you gave up the first pick in the draft? I know there's a lot of conversation right now about there not being like a massive number of blue chip prospects or like can't miss guys at the very top of the draft, but for a team that needs a quarterback, and I listen, that Drew Lock game was awesome, but I don't really know if that's something that we'll be seeing, again from Drew Lock in the near future. I'm just curious of how you feel now with this kicking you out of that. You controlled the draft, like the entire college unit of guys coming in was all yours for the taking. You could decide the fate of how things kicked off. I'm just curious to see where you all stand on that one there. But hey, hats off to New York. I'm very surprised that they came in and got the win the way they did. This felt like a team, to me at least, that was just working their way to a number 1 overall selection, but I guess not. At number 29, the Titans sitting at 3-13. Really tough week for Tennessee, and just a tough look overall. I mean, I'm genuinely surprised that Jacksonville held them to just 13 points in this game here. I thought Tennessee would maybe be able to find a few more points to put on the board, even if they did end up losing. Ultimately, it's not like Jacksonville's defense by any means has been all that great. And I know, obviously, no Tony Pollard in this game here. Mason Rudolph's your quarterback. But, I mean, Tajay Spears, he stepped in. He actually looked pretty good, and he was one of the few takeaways that you could take positively from this game. 20 carries, 95 yards, nearly 5 yards per attempt. It's only the third time in his career that he's been given more than 10 carries in a game. So hats off to him for stepping up. He looked really good there, but just a tough loss for a team that's, looking towards the future. Bears at number 28. 10 straight losses. 5 touchdowns scored since Matt Eberflus was fired. The day after Thanksgiving? A couple days after Thanksgiving. I forget exactly when it happened, but 5 touchdowns scored nonetheless in the 4 games that they have played since Matt Eberflus was fired following that Thursday Night Football fiasco. This team has allowed 30 points in 3 of those same 4 games as well. Obviously, aside from the 6-3 loss that they had on Thursday Night Football, where they couldn't muster more than 6 to win a game, I've got to say, this is just crash and burn at the highest of orders for Chicago. Another team that, for Bears fans, I'm genuinely sorry for what's going on there. The good news, though, you're looking for coaches. You're looking for potentially even a new GM, depending on who the new head coach is coming in. Ben Johnson's obviously a candidate. I know that there is a crowd of people out there that wouldn't be too mad if maybe Mike Vrabel came in and turned things around over there. So we'll see what happens with Mike Vrabel. He's available to interview as of yesterday. So, I mean, a lot to look forward to. Then the Jaguars rounding out the group at 4-12 here. I guess like the bright spot here in what has been a really tough season for Jacksonville, you absolutely nailed the Brian Thomas selection. Another really good game by him. He's at currently 80 receptions on the season, 1,179 yards, and double-digit touchdown catches now sitting at 10. This is someone who does not get quite the love he deserves because he's lost in the Jacksonville's 4-12 season right now, but picking number 5 overall now with your win over Tennessee. Again, another team looking forward towards the future here, but if I do have one real positive to take away from this season, it's got to be Brian Thomas Jr., man, because he's making Mac Jones look serviceable at times. And I mean, Mac Jones has looked pretty bad as recently as like last week. So hats off to Brian Thomas Jr. and what he's doing for this offense and what he could be doing for this offense in the foreseeable future. Moving into the struggle bus category, those teams that are in a pretty tough way themselves, but have probably won too many games to be picking somewhere within the top 5. Starting at the very bottom of this group here at 26 is going to be the New Orleans Saints. We then have the Jets at 25, the Panthers at 24, Raiders at 23, Colts at 22, Cowboys at 21, and then the 49ers rounding out the category at the top, sitting at number 20. Now, the Saints, this is a team that I really feel like you can't even fairly judge each and every single week. Talk about playing hospital ball. Like, you have whoever you have out there for the sake of fielding a 53-man roster every single week. And I genuinely feel for this Saints team. And they're a team that is sitting at 5-11 right now that could honestly really benefit from maybe having 2 more losses in the loss column, all things considered, with where this organization stands right now. And unfortunately, because they rattled off 2 40-point victories at the beginning of the season when they were healthy, for the most part overall, now you're like ultimately paying the price for that wild start to the season. So here the Saints are, just a team that if you didn't know any better, you probably assumed they played or at least practiced somewhere in a medical facility. The Jets sitting at 25. I mean, you want to talk, there are some disasters at the bottom of this league, and it's a very weird season for the NFL because it's so top and bottom heavy where the league is designed for parity, but this season has been one of the weirder ones where there are so many teams sitting at 3 or 4 wins right now with like that random 5-win team from the Saints, and then everyone else is like 7 wins or better. So it's a very weird season with just how top and bottom heavy it is. But the Jets, another and they might take the cake for disaster of the season. And Jets fans, I'm sorry, I don't want this to sound like I'm just ragging on you. I'm not, but like we're just being honest here. I do feel for Jets fans. It sounds like there's a possibility of a Rex Ryan reunion going on right now, as I've been seeing the buzz regarding him potentially being interested in coming back to New York, and that being a possibility of at least having an interview take place. You have the question ultimately of what's going to happen now with Aaron Rodgers, as this experiment has flat out failed in my opinion. And I mean, based off comments as recently as last week, you'd have to assume Aaron Rodgers is as good as gone. So I'm curious if he's getting either released or if he's just going to opt to retire so he can't be released. Is he going to get traded away? Like, who knows what's going on there? And then you have Sauce Gardner, who is unwilling to even recommend other players to come to the Jets organization. Like, there is a lot going on in New York right now, and it is not pretty. Panthers sitting at 24, just a really, really tough game, outmatched overall. No ability to run the football. Pass protection fell apart as well. The offensive line as a whole just kind of collapsing in this game to a Tampa Bay Bucks team that looked like they came in with their hair on fire. And the defense, I mean, if you would have told me that the defense did not remember that they had a game, I would have believed you with the way that they looked in that one there. Baker Mayfield absolutely lighting them up. Bucky Irving on the ground as well. Like another 200 yards rushing allowed for the Panthers. This has been happening far too often recently. And I don't know where this team goes from here, because it feels like some of the talk of like the Bryce Young progression has maybe slowed down a little bit and got a little bit quieter as well. Another team that is just like, it feels like biding their time for an offseason that needs to see improvements for this roster. And then the Raiders, rounding out those 4-win teams here. I will say it again because I said it last week. I respect the hell out of Antonio Pierce and him going in and winning back-to-back games here to end the season. Whether they win or not next week, the fact that he stood on that podium last week and was like, yeah, basically, I'm just paraphrasing here, but basically it was just like, we're not playing to lose. Like we're here to win football games. And for him to be coming out, leading this team to W's when they really have no reason to. And on top of that, offense found a little bit of a run game this week through Amir Abdullah, 20 carries, 115 yards on his part. And then a question for Raiders fans, just because I'm curious, how are we feeling about Aiden O'Connell right now? Because he's looking pretty solid, I guess you could say. So, I mean, like, and at this point now, with where you're potentially picking as your team keeps winning and winning, you're probably out of the running for one of the top quarterbacks that is in this draft class, and there's not a ton, at least at this current moment here. Obviously, things can change. Pre-draft process always sparks the interest of an extra guy or two. We wound up with 6 first-round picks last year, and I don't think that was what everyone thought was going to happen last year going into the offseason at the very least. So, very curious to see where your heads are all at with Aiden O'Connell right now and what you would or would not like to see with him. The Colts at 22. Everything that Pat McAfee said in his tweet, if you did not see that, and Colts fans, I know you did, that's about pretty much how I feel. That's, if you want to know how I feel about this Colts team and me not ranting for a good 5 minutes about the frustrations that I have as a Colts fan, and I've always said I use it so loosely because I'm not a diehard fan like I used to be, but I do still follow the team closer than I do, I would say, the rest of the league. They are the team I grew up rooting for, but my God, that's how I can sum that up. Everything Pat McAfee said, every single word, I agree with. The Cowboys at 7-9, big yikes on their part, 41-7 loss. a team that has been kind of decimated by injuries as well. And I even talked about it. I was very curious about what this offense is going to look like minus CD Lamb, because he was a big part of the success Cooper Rush was having. But now that he's gone, I think we really have seen this season the value that CD Lamb brings to this team here, because he was making Cooper Rush look a lot better than I think he actually is. And then this week, going up against a really good Eagles defense minus him now, you kind of got a harsh reality of where this Cowboys team is currently at. And then the 49ers at number 20 to round out the struggle bus right at the front, though, with a hard-fought, valiant effort, but still coming up short. This was one of the better games I think we've seen from San Francisco in quite some time. I think you go back to like the Bears game, and then prior to that, whatever their last win prior to that game was, I guess you could say. And even then, I think it was like a 23-20 win or something like that. Not a great season, obviously, for San Fran, but the best that they've looked in a while, but big mistakes ultimately costing them, whether it was Jake Moody missing the couple of field goals that he did from 51 and 58. And I mean, those are long tries, so, all right. But he also misses a PAT. He blasted the onside kick out of bounds at the end of the game, and at that point, it just felt like his mental was way off at that point. So it kind of is what it is. But on top of that, you had Brock Purdy basically handing Kirby Joseph his 8th and 9th interceptions of the season, and that really kind of broke you altogether. You let the Lions hang 41 on you, or was it 40? Is it 40, 41? I'm already forgetting the final score, and I'm literally recording this like an hour after Monday Night Football ended. I don't know. 40-something points were allowed in that game altogether, and just a tough night to nearly wrap up what has been a really tough season in San Francisco. A lot to consider this offseason, and now after this performance, I even kind of talked about it leading into this football game here, we have seen some tough performances from Brock Purdy where he's losing games in big situations, and yes, there's a lot going on around him injury-wise. I completely understand that, but especially the late interception, back-breaking interceptions for you, that the first one basically swung the tide of the game. The second one ultimately lost you the game. Just a tough look for Brock Purdy as the season ends and he goes into an offseason where he's eligible for his first contract extension. Moving into Jeff Fisher, those middle-of-the-pack teams hovering around 500. Sitting at number 19, we have the Arizona Cardinals. At 18, the Seahawks. The Dolphins are sitting at 17, Falcons at 16, and then the Bengals rounding out the category at number 15. Now, the Cardinals, heartbreaking way to lose. Gotta feel for a team that was just battling to the very finish line. Tipped ball off your guy's hands, goes into a defender from the Rams side, ultimately losing you the game. Kyler Murray's second pick of the night. Tough way to go down. And it's unfortunate because, this was a special night for those of you who maybe not following the Arizona Cardinals as closely as Cardinals fans are. This was a special night because Trey McBride, I believe it was on his 98th reception of the season, finally caught his first touchdown pass of the year. Your defense did great. Your offense did almost enough, coming up quite short though, but unfortunately, late game interception costs you. But shout out to Trey McBride, man. That was one of the most well-deserved touchdowns I think I've ever seen in my life, because it's not too often you have guys going for nearly 100 receptions and not catching a singular score. Seahawks at 9-7. I mean, you won the football game, so there is that, but a 6-3 win over the Chicago Bears, and yeah, rainy weather and whatnot, not great or ideal. And shout out to Tariq Woolen for the game-winning interception, but not how you want to go down but go over in a game against a team that, as we talked about earlier, is just in quite a way. You'd want a little bit more of a convincing win here, at least to feel good about where you stand coming out of this season right now. And it's interesting because we talked about this prior to the matchup, but Seattle was in a weird place where they needed a lot to break their way to have next week's game against the Rams actually matter. And now, despite the fact that they have an opportunity to beat the Rams next week and then finish with a tied record, but getting that win ultimately not mattering and they're already eliminated from the playoffs is just a weird situation. It's not too often where we see a litany of tiebreakers be potentially there for you to lock up a division prior to a final divisional matchup to end the season to win the division. Well, it was a weird situation, but ultimately the Seahawks are now out, so this game next week for the Rams, it does not matter, and I'll be curious to see how that game unfolds. Dolphins sitting at 8-8. Who would have thought it was going to be Snoop Huntley? Snoop Huntley, of all people, Tyler Huntley, for those of you that don't know that that's his nickname there, Snoop Huntley was the one keeping the Dolphins' playoff hopes alive. Now, all eyes are on Tua going forward. This is one of those things where this is so unfortunate, and I'm worried and kind of nervous because it sounds like he's not going to be able to go based off the way Mike McDaniel was talking, and the fact that he's addressing potential hip surgery conversation, like something had to have gotten out somewhere for reporters to be asking that question. And I obviously understand, the hip injury he had coming out of college and all that, but apparently that, it has nothing to do with that. It's not related. So I'm curious why that question's being asked and why it's something that needs to be addressed, because that means the hip injury is pretty bad. And if the Dolphins have everything break their way next week and they do somehow make the playoffs, it will suck for Miami that this is where they currently are, because if Tua can't play and the hip injury is that serious, that's just going to be deflating. So for a team that's hanging on by a literal thread right now, I guess somewhat exciting, but this is not how you'd want this to be accomplished. The Falcons at 8-8. Tough way to lose after missing short a game-winning or potential game-winning field goal, I should say, at the end of regulation here. I'm curious about the way that last drive was kind of just handled altogether, because when Michael Penix completes that first pass and, they went down the field, it felt like a good, 15, 20 yards, maybe even a little bit more than that, 24, I think it was. I forget what the number was exactly, but it was a good chunk of the field. Why are you not calling timeout immediately, especially with the fact you have 2 timeouts in your pocket? And if I'm remembering correctly, on top of that, you went into overtime with a timeout in your pocket. So just an interesting turn of events right there. I feel like on such a massive play where you gain so many yards, you could maybe try to call the hurry up and but you're relying on your entire offense to get down the field. They just ran a play, so you're already semi-winded, and then you're having everyone sprint to line up, try to get a play call in. Just call a timeout there. That would have been the spot to call it. So I'm just not thrilled at the way the end of regulation was kind of handled there on Atlanta's end. And then ultimately the DPI call sets you up for a missed field goal, but just a tough way to finish that game altogether, then ultimately losing on top of that. Penix, though, I am excited to see what Penix ends up being for this Falcons team. What the unfortunate thing right now that Atlanta's going through is they're this close to being a playoff team, but they opted to start their rookie quarterback this late into the season, and you can see he's just missing throws, and he's doing his best to adjust on the fly with so much on the line in this short amount of time that he's given. And then to see him potentially get thrusted into the playoffs if things do break their way would be insane. But right now, it feels like if Penix got the start sooner, maybe midpoint of the season, I'd be curious what their record would be ultimately. But even if it was the same, you probably are getting at least slightly better performance from Penix, where he's just not missing shots of guys wide open, So I'm excited for Penix, but this is a really awkward situation for Atlanta to be in as a team that's right on the outside looking in at the playoffs. And then the Bengals rounding out the group at 8-8. Joe Burrow, man, he's probably not going to win MVP, but I'll be damned if I don't at least say that guy deserves some consideration. Another 400 yards, 3 more touchdowns through the air. If he somehow drags Cincinnati, because they did what they had to do against Denver, they got the win. Now you need Denver to lose against Kansas City, and you can sneak your way into the playoffs as long as you win next week against the Steelers. Steelers are reeling right now. You're in a really good spot offensively. It really is it's incredible to see the Bengals in the position that they are currently in, considering how dead they looked at the first quarter or so, even a few weeks after that point of the season now. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase combo is as good as they come and are one of the toughest duos to stop in the league. And I mean, even if Jamar Chase isn't the one racking up all the touchdowns, you had T. Higgins with a 3-touchdown performance. They are such a lethal combination. If the defense could just consistently play for 4 quarters, this is one of those teams where you don't want to face them because their offense is so potent. But the defense is what it is. They at least played a good first half this week against the Broncos, but even if the Bengals did somehow make the playoffs, they're one of those teams you don't want to match up against, but we've seen Cincinnati time and time again dump points on opponents, 30 some odd, even 40, and still lose. And it's or maybe not 40 and lose, maybe that's not the right thing to say, but a lot of 30s, mid 30s, high 30s, and not come away with wins if the defense could actually just play. But man, this Bengals team is so entertaining to watch right now with so much on the line, and they just keep winning to make you believe a little bit more each and every single week. Now, moving into the playoff hopefuls, explanation as I always give, we must have 7 AFC and 7 NFC teams between the playoff hopefuls and the Super Bowl contenders. Obviously, division leader from each and every single division, and then, of course, the remaining 3 wild card teams that remain from each conference. Starting at the bottom, at number 14, the Houston Texans, sitting at 9-7. Broncos right above them at 13, Buccaneers at 12, Chargers at 11, Rams at 10. I have the Steelers at 9, Commanders at 8, and then the Packers rounding out the group at number 7. Now the Texans, they are in some serious trouble offensively, and I'm really concerned. The injuries at wide receiver is one thing, but the offensive line just continues to regress, it feels, each and every single week. Another 5 sacks allowed in this game, and the number just seems to be climbing at a rapid rate for total sacks on C.J. Stroud this season. You couple that with just the overall play of the offense, 10 first downs, 4 of 15 on third down. You had 2 drives end in a turnover on downs. You had an interception that started the second half of the game. I mean, the Texans are lucky they even had 2 points on the board. They were blessed that special teams set them up for that, and that was where that was the one good thing you could have from that game. But this is a Texans team that has been caught with an injury bug and also just some poor offensive line play on top of that at just one of the worst possible times. And it sucks because this is a Texans team that I think healthy can probably hang with the best of them. But at this point now, with Tank Dell gone and, of course, Stephon Diggs, it's the Stephon Diggs thing gets mitigated. You're right back to not having Tank Dell again with that awful injury. It's last season kind of all over again, and I'll be damned if, the Texans wind up having to play the Baltimore Ravens again. That would be awful, especially if the Ravens come away with the win and steal the division. The possibility is there. Or I guess not, because they're all division winners. Scratch that. Stupid thing of me to say. I'm thinking of the Texans as a wild card team because they're 9-7, but they're not. They're division winners. That's not possible next week. But even then, the Texans matched up with a team like the Chargers. Again, I don't know, and I'm really, really worried about the Texans right now. The Broncos at 13. Bo Nix went out and quieted some of the noise, and I was really happy to see this because there was a lot of conversation around his yards per attempt the week prior and just him not willing to throw the football deep. That moonshot to Mims was phenomenal. 51 yards to the house. He threw it, I think, 67 total air yards from when it left his hand down to the actual hands of Mims. So it was just a beautiful throw, beautiful throw. The problem is Denver took way too long to get going offensively. And on top of that, I mean, you look at what Cincinnati was doing in that first half of the game. They had about 18 minutes total of time of possession. They swallowed up that first half with some of their drives that they had there. And then the defense, struggling as most teams have with the Bengals offense this season. You got 7 sacks in this game. You were coming up big, but Joe Burrow just kept coming back, kept tearing up your secondary and en route to 412 total yards passing, ultimately beat you in overtime when you just could not come away with the win. Buccaneers at 12. This is what the first game between them and the Carolina Panthers should have looked like. I talked about this in my preview too. If Baker Mayfield did not have the couple of interceptions that he had that set some things up late for Carolina, they probably run away with that game too in my eyes. This was what the game should have been. They basically rewrote the wrongs of the first matchup. No turnovers from Baker. 359 yards, 5 touchdowns altogether. I mean, and now on top of that, with the Falcons losing this week, you are in the win and you're in situation that you nearly let slip away from you last week. So at this point now, this team can run the ball. We saw it with the 200 yards they racked up on the ground this past week. They can throw the ball as Baker Mayfield is having a career resurgence. And I can't go without mentioning that the season Baker Mayfield is having right now in Tampa Bay would be the best all-time season by a Cleveland Browns quarterback. We need to make sure we remind the Browns, not the fans, but the organization as a whole, that they are a bunch of numbnuts for getting rid of a franchise quarterback in Baker Mayfield, all because I don't really know why, but here we are. Bucs are in a position now. They control their destiny. They have a shot to lock up their playoff spot and win themselves the NFC South. Chargers at 10-6. Great to see J.K. Dobbins back. This is like perfectly timed return for this team now because the balance is back for the offense. Dobbins racked up, I believe, about 75, 76 yards, something like that, and some change. You had Herbert throwing for nearly 300 yards and 3 passing touchdowns as well. Every single week, I cannot believe how good Ladd McConkey is for this team here. This team is one of those teams you don't want to get caught by right now, especially that they're getting healthy at the right time. The Dobbins effect is going to be very real. This team will be able to now run the football effectively, pass the football effectively, and they've got a pretty good defense on top of that as well. This is the complete form that you wanted for this Chargers team at this current point in the season. Win next week, you'll feel really good going into the playoffs, stay healthy, and this is one of those teams that you don't necessarily want to get caught by. Rams at number 10 this week, and because this is a team where the offense has just been humming since that win over the Vikings back in, week number 11, whenever that was. The defense this time coming up big time and getting the W. And we talked about it earlier. 9 points allowed, obviously. 2 interceptions off of Kyler Murray, one of them including the big tip for the game winner. You also got the 4 sacks from your defense as well. This is one of those games that you almost wanted to see from the Rams because it feels like the offense was kind of what was guiding this team to wins weekly, and it was going to come down to if the offense fails, then this team might wind up losing. But this was a game where your offense kind of stumbling, falling on their face a bit, showing some in the face of adversity, having a very young nucleus of guys over there in Los Angeles on the defensive side of the football step up the way they did, come away with the victory. This was a win that I kind of didn't know I wanted to see happen this way because it's made me feel even better about this Rams team knowing that they can rely on their defense to win them a football game. The Steelers at number 9, no more than 17 points scored in their last 3 games with 5 offensive turnovers in that span as well. The defenses they've played, of course, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Kansas City. I don't have much issue with the defense as it stands. I mean, they're bound to break if their offense is flatlining every single week eventually, but the way this offense has now looked for almost going on a month now, you're hoping that Cincinnati can be a good get-right game for you with how their defense has fared for most of the season. But I'm also worried because if Cincinnati starts going crazy, do I believe in this Pittsburgh offense to be able to match Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase shot for shot for shot for shot? I don't know. So I'm worried about the Steelers team right now. 3 straight losses. They are stumbling right now and in a really bad way. One of those teams that just a month ago looked like they could be a legit juggernaut, and it felt like they were getting better every single week offensively since Russell took over. Now I don't really know how I feel about Pittsburgh. They're definitely a playoff team. They'll be in the mix, but I'm a little bit concerned about how things stand for them. The Commanders at number 8, 11-5, Jaden Daniels stepping in and reminding everyone why he has been a heavy favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year with another 350 total yards and 3 scores. The Commanders are on a 4-game winning streak right now. They were in a weird, again, another one of those teams, not in a weird spot, but in kind of a bit of a tough spot because, 4 weeks ago, prior to this winning streak, you're looking at, a 7-5 team? A lot of people talking about, this is a team regressing back to the mean, a team that is obviously overachieving. I myself am even guilty of saying that. But in the face of, securing yourself a playoff spot and going up against a team that is fighting for their division lives on top of that, and they brought you to the very brink on Sunday Night Football. Game-winning drive in overtime, Jaden Daniels making big plays, playing tough, playing very tough. This is exactly the type of football at this point in the season that you want to be seeing from your number 2 overall quarterback selection. Jaden Daniels is that guy, and with the team now sitting at 11-5, with the potential of maybe going 12-5 if they get another win next week, I think the people that were saying system quarterback, just wait till they get the tape on him, I'm starting to think Jaden Daniels is a little bit more than just Cliff Kingsbury's offense. And then the Packers rounding out the group at number 7. Green Bay is good, but they are still not quite there, and I think I have come to terms with that. This was the same story from the first time that they played the Minnesota Vikings, almost to a T. They didn't fall as far behind. You fall, though, far behind. You're battling back. You capitalize on some key mistakes late in that game to potentially claw back and make it close. But ultimately, you just can't get it done, and it feels like there's just not quite enough in the tank for the Packers to hang with some of those upper echelon teams in the NFC and just top of the NFL right now. Jordan Love's struggles also against the pressure that he has faced this season is a bit of an issue because you're going into a playoff season now where every single defense that you potentially face is going to be able to bring pressure, make you uncomfortable, get to Jordan Love with a 43.2% completion rate when he's under pressure. I am a little bit concerned about where this Packers team stands right now, and I mean, you can thank Minnesota for kind of letting you back into that football game and making it look a little bit closer than it actually was. And I don't want to take too much away from Green Bay because it was a comeback cut short, but unfortunately, there was a lot of Minnesota allowing you to claw back into that one. And then the Super Bowl contenders, the top 6 teams in the NFL. Love hearing the debate on this every single week. At number 6, Baltimore Ravens. At 5, the Detroit Lions falling after a win. Vikings at number 4, Chiefs at number 3, Bills at number 2, and the Philadelphia Eagles standing at the top of the mountain here at number 1. The Ravens, biggest story for me is not the Lamar Jackson MVP campaign. It is not what Derrick Henry has done as the addition to the offense this season. The story for me, and I'm sure Ravens fans have noticed this, the Ravens have allowed over 200 yards passing just once in their last 6 games. That right there is what matters here because this team was struggling mightily the first half or so of the season stopping the pass, and they've really cleaned it up. They've made some changes. Kyle Hamilton's position kind of moved around a little bit, and now this defense looks like against the run, against the pass, whether it's 3rd down, whether it's 4th down, in the red zone, goal line situation, you can count on the Ravens defense the way they're playing right now. And behind the offense that looks as good as it does, this is one of those teams getting hot at the perfect time. Lions at number 5, big win, but at this point, I can't ignore this, and it's kind of something that's been bothering me, but I think it's time we mention it, at least myself, and really throw it out there into the open. The defense has me concerned. 13 guys are still on the IR from the defensive side of the football, and I think that these injuries are starting to catch up with them. Now, don't get me wrong. Big plays in big spots by Kirby Joseph to really turn this football game around, but those were basically layups from Brock Purdy. Like, he threw both of those right to Kirby Joseph. He had to be in the right position to be there, don't get me wrong, but he literally mailed those signed, sealed, and delivered straight to Kirby Joseph. Do not get me wrong. And you look at the numbers from the last 4 games, 130 points allowed. And you can thank that number, like you can thank the Bears that number is not higher because sandwiched in those 4 games is the 17 points you allowed to the Bears. If that was even a slightly competent football team, that number is probably 24 points, maybe 27, something along those lines. And you essentially needed to put up over 40 points to win this football game. I love the offense. I love the aggressiveness of Dan Campbell, his willingness to go for it on fourth down in some pretty wacky situations. I love all of that. But the defense in the state that it is in right now, excuse me, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm losing my voice here. The way the defense stands right now, I have my reservations, and we kind of caught a glimpse of it when the 49ers felt like they were almost starting to figure out the Lions offense a bit. There was like that point in like the second and third quarter-ish area where they got ahead, and I was a little bit worried, but the offense is still as good as it is, so it helps. And the defense, again, making big plays when it matters most. But if they end up running into some of these really good playoff defenses now over the next few weeks, even as soon as the Vikings next week, the Vikings will be a really good litmus test for them and where they stand. If for whatever reason their offense gets stopped on a drive or two, are they going to be able to match the points of what I feel like is almost inevitable coming from the Minnesota Vikings next week? I genuinely think that the winning team for next week's game probably going to have to score more than like 34 points, 35 points at least, something along those lines. And if the Lions defense can't make a stop, and Sam Darnold, who has been great for the most part this season, he has thrown a handful of interceptions, double-digit numbers now, but the defense it has me concerned. I still think they're a phenomenal team. I'm not doubting the team by any means, but I think it's fair to at least be somewhat worried based off the numbers that we've been seeing for the last month now. The Vikings at 4, leapfrogging the Lions here. Sam Darnold with a career best 377 is a hard number for me to say, I guess. Career best yardage mark, 3 more touchdowns. The interception, missed field goal, punt in the fourth quarter, just that string of drives there ultimately allowed Green Bay to claw back. But I mean, the way we are looking at Minnesota right now, we're in a game where they couldn't even really run the football all that effectively because Green Bay's defensive front, for what it's worth, was giving you some problems when it came to trying to run the ball. If you can't find like your big 3 guys, which is obviously Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, your tight end TJ Hawkinson, now you have guys like Jalen Naylor coming out of nowhere, and they're racking up a touchdown and 80 some odd yards. They are so deep right now, and it's unbelievable that Sam Darnold and the Vikings are at 14-2 and are about to battle for the NFC North title. Not only that, but for the number 1 seed in the NFC. We are set up good next week for football, and man, oh man, I cannot wait for that game between the Vikings and Lions to finally settle this score here. But I've just all the credit in the world to everyone over in Minnesota, from the defensive side led by Brian Flores to Kevin O'Connell and what he's doing with his on the offensive side, to Sam Darnold, man, proving me wrong every single step of the way, from making me a doubter into a believer. It's been unbelievable to watch, and I'm here for every single second of it. It's been a roller coaster, but it's been awesome to watch. Or not a roller coaster. It's been roller coaster for me and my belief and disbelief as I've gone through the season. The Chiefs at number 3, sitting at 15-1. Honestly, I would be comfortable putting the Chiefs at number 1 right now, but the Bills have a win over them, and I am not quite sure that they could take down the Eagles the way they look right now. This offense, though, is getting healthy at the right time and at the perfect time. Patrick Mahomes went for 320 yards, 3 touchdowns in this game. Defense allowing just 10 points, despite the 200 yards rushing from Russell Wilson, Najee Harris, and Jalen Warren all combined together there. They came away with a couple of big turnovers to negate a lot of those yards that they were racking up on the ground. This team, with Isaiah Pacheco now back in the fold, Marquise Brown back in the fold, obviously the signing of trade for DeAndre Hopkins, this team is where it needs to be right now at the perfect moment, and the rest of the NFL should be worried. The Bills at 2, they're primed and ready to go. I mean, Josh Allen, another MVP performance. He is a favorite amongst a lot of people right now. Defense completely dismantled Aaron Rodgers in that game. I mean, you absolutely smacked around the Jets 40-14. Backups were in the game somewhere in the middle of the fourth quarter. Like, it was never really close at any given point in that game. Even if the score was close, you could tell who the better team was for a vast majority of that contest, and it was not close at all. I also am happy to see, because I called for this kind of in my preview as well, I'm happy to see that the Buffalo Bills came out and smacked around the Jets the way they did, because you're coming off that game against the Patriots last week where a lot of people were like, what was that? Did you just sleepwalk into that game expecting to win because it's in Buffalo and maybe not prepare as much as you should have? So it was good to see them come back and remind everyone, okay, maybe we overlooked things a little bit, but we are still the Buffalo Bills. And then at number 1, and I've been so excited to talk about this because I caught a lot of flack last week for keeping the Eagles at 1 despite their loss, even though they lost a very tight competitive game against an 11-5 Washington Commanders team right now, and they lost their starting quarterback literally on the second drive. Well, you come into this one here. Cowboys have been kind of a nuisance despite being knocked out of the playoffs, but they've been hanging around at 7-9. They come in and absolutely wipe them. And it was with Kenny Pickett at quarterback, courtesy of Saquon Barkley, another 167 yards, crossing the 2,000-yard mark in 16 games. Probably going to break Dickerson's record next week if he is allowed to. If not, 2,000 yards, I think, is still a phenomenal accomplishment on its own. And the defense, 7 points allowed, 4 takeaways. This game is why I kept them at number 1, because without their starting quarterback, and they were prepared to not have their starting quarterback this time around, they still went in and smacked around a lesser opponent the way they should. I will stand on the hill that if Jalen Hurts does not get hurt last week, Eagles are probably not losing that football game, and that's fine if you disagree. That's just how I stand. From top to bottom, and I'm not an Eagles fan. If you missed me talking about it earlier, I'm a Colts fan. I grew up a Colts fan. I use the term loosely, but I grew up a Colts fan. From top to bottom, through this roster, offensively and defensively, they are the most complete team through and through. Their defense is so tight against the run, against the pass, in crucial conversion situations, in the red zone, you name it, they can do it. And they have rookies. Quinion Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, anybody? Some of the best corners in the NFL. They're not corners, but defensive backs, because Cooper DeJean plays a weird role. But, I mean, what they are doing right now is incredible. That's all I got to say. They're my number 1 team. If you disagree, that's fine. That's fine. But I like Philadelphia at number 1. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thoughts, opinions. What am I getting right? What am I getting wrong? But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.